Hello, welcome to the Vertical Drop Viking. I'm Josef. Today I want to talk to you about a very special roller coaster, the Magnum XL-200 at Cedar Point in Sandusky, Ohio. We'll go over the ride experience, the history of the ride, and some of the long-lasting and far-reaching effects that this ride has had on the entire industry that can still be felt today. If this is your first time here, please consider giving my video a like and subscribing to the channel. It really helps me to grow, and it allows me to invade your page next week with another roller coaster video. Let's dive into it. Magnum XL is a steel roller coaster that was designed and built by Aerodynamics in 1989. It is the world's first full-circuit roller coaster with a height of over 200 feet. It sits in the very back of Cedar Point, with both its pre-lift section and the approach to the final brake run going over the resort entrance that leads to Cedar Point Shores Water Park and the Lighthouse Point Campground. A 90-degree turn to the right after its pre-lift section aligns the pre-lift with the lift hill and the first camelback hill. The lift hill takes a full 55 seconds to climb from base to peak. Plenty of time for you to think about all the decisions you made that got you here, and to build suspense for the exhilaration that's soon to follow. The view from this lift hill is unbelievable. Absolutely top-notch view. You get a view of the water park directly below. The campground is off to your left. And then off to your right and ahead of you, you have nothing but an uninterrupted view of the beach and Lake Erie, stretching out as far as the eye can see. Once you crest the hill, the speed begins picking up immediately as the train begins to careen down the first drop, which is a 60-degree decline that was record-setting when it opened in 1989. At the bottom of this first hill, the trains reach their top speed of 72 miles an hour, another record at the time. It tears up that hill with all that momentum, giving airtime at the top of the hill before banking slightly to the left to facilitate a left turn, aligning the train with the rest of the layout. This transition from level to banked is the first of 3 such transitions on the ride, all 3 of which are far less graceful and smooth than you'll find on any modern coaster. These janky transitions give the ride an extra element of scariness, especially after a long day of riding B&Ms, Steel Vengeance, as by comparison, the banking on these old Aeros feels unsafe, unstable, and out of control. Once the train's banked to the left, it begins its second dive towards the water park, this one curving to the left, racing down towards the first of Magnum's 3 tunnels. These structures of sheet metal wrapped around the ride add a certain intensity to the already intense ride, as the light of the sun falls away behind you, and all the sounds of the ride reverberate and echo inside, turning that train's already formidable roar into a focused cacophony of steel and wheels directed straight at your eardrums. Before you can leave this tunnel, you're jerked upwards as you begin to navigate the ride's third airtime hill. This third hill doesn't use up nearly as much of the speed of Magnum as the second one, and instead allows you to float right up and over it. At the bottom of that third hill, trim brakes are installed, which only activate if the train is moving faster than intended towards the turnaround. Whether or not these brakes engage, they are followed by the next janky transition, and possibly the jankiest transition on Magnum. The profiling on this feels unsafe. This is another bank to the left, and it aligns the train with the turnaround itself so that you can begin the long left turn that makes up this turnaround. This transition makes clear sense of those trim brakes. Even with the trim brakes active, it's easy to see that this transition, hitting this transition with the force of loaded train 500 times a day, probably causes some stress to the Magnum's ride structure that they wanted to mitigate. So this trim brakes right here before this turnaround makes sense to me. Now, after making this precarious bank to the left, which again feels wild and out of control, riders enter the most unique element of Magnum. This is the turnaround. It's never been duplicated on any coaster that I can find. And so there's as many names for this turnaround as there are coaster enthusiasts who enjoy Magnum, or even coaster enthusiasts who've ridden Magnum, nobody can agree on what to call this turnaround. I've heard it called the pretzel turnaround, pretzel helix, centerline helix. I'm partial to calling it a reverse helix. This element is unique in that you enter the helix from the center, it goes level once you begin the turn, and it stays mostly level until you dip underneath it to begin the return trip. The third and final janky banking transition pulls you out of this reverse helix and sends you into the second of the tunnels, this one somehow still just as loud as the first. Inside this tunnel is the first of what Magnum fans affectionately refer to as the Triangle Hills. These smaller scale airtime hills are more sharply angled at the peaks and valleys than on any modern coaster, and the effect is some of the most violent ejector airtime you'll feel on any coaster in the entire world. But the first one is just a taste of what's to come. After the first Triangle Hill, you'll hit a smoother, rounder speed hill, and then another speed hill that curves you slightly to the right and aligns you with the rest of the Triangle Hills. The ride then hits you with 4 of these Triangle Hills in rapid succession. It's one of the most intense and also unassuming moments on the entire ride. The 4th one takes place inside the final tunnel, where special lighting effects have been in place since 2019. After the 4th Triangle Hill, the ride sends you up as if there was a 5th, and then the track levels off at the top, giving one last pop of ejector before it sends you back over the walkway and into the final brake run before the station. Some riders will decry the old-fashioned feel of Magnum, the intensity that doesn't go out of its way to make its riders feel safe, the jarring, precarious feeling that the ride gives you as you enter into and out of its bank turns, the violent ejector airtime that doesn't even show its face until halfway through the ride. When all the big, photogenic, scary-looking hills are already behind you, that's when the ride turns up the intensity to 10. But for the special breed of coaster fan who thrives on this intensity, who thrives in their own fear, whose coaster compulsion drives them to seek out the most intense and most aggressive experiences, Magnum is a masterpiece. The greatest coaster that aerodynamics ever built. In 1986, the CEO of Cedar Fair, Robert L. Munger Jr., stepped down due to health issues. His replacement was a man named Dick Kinzel. Kinzel would prove in short order to be a revolutionary force for the entire industry. In 1987, he contracted Aerodynamics, a roller coaster company based in Clearfield, Utah, to build Iron Dragon, which was the area's first suspended coaster since the failure of the Bat at Kings Island. Aero was famous for inventing the tubular steel track for roller coasters during their development of the Matterhorn bobsleds ride at Disneyland. After the successful launch of Iron Dragon, Kinzel had his eyes out for the next big thing. Now, the trend in the US at the time was inversions. There was almost a pre-coaster war going on with inversions. Who could build the most inversions? Everyone was trying to outdo their neighbor. If my neighbor's coaster has 6 inversions, well, I need 7. Around this time, in Japan, at a place called Yomiuri Land, Togo had just come out with a new kind of coaster. This coaster had no inversions and was focused on vertical G-forces, ups and downs, just like an old wooden coaster was before the inversion craze kicked off. Dick Kinzel saw a CNN report on this coaster while he was on vacation with his wife, and he was immediately inspired to not merely emulate this design, but to outdo it, to elevate it. One of his primary motivators was his aversion to over-the-shoulder restraints, which were standard for all inverting coasters at the time. Togo, Intamin, and Aero were all considered for the project, and Aero was chosen on the sole fact that they were based in the US. At the time, the US dollar had an unfavorable exchange rate with Japan and with most of Europe, Liechtenstein in this case. So just by virtue of dollars being worth less, the coaster was going to be more expensive if they didn't go with a US company. And so Aerodynamics was chosen to make this coaster. Kinzel went to Aero and their new president, Ron Toomer. Remember how I said a little bit ago that the trend in coasters was to have more inversions than the last guy. Ron Toomer is the designer of the first 3 inversion coaster, the first 4 inversion coaster, the first 5 inversion coaster, the first 6 and 7 inversion coasters, the first coaster with interlocking vertical loops, and Cedar Point's last major coaster, Gemini. Now, the initial plans that Kinzel and Toomer agreed on had the ride at 187 feet tall, with the specific intention of being taller than Shockwave at Six Flags Great America. This was the tallest coaster in the world at the time, designed by, you guessed it, Ron Toomer. When Kinzel brought the proposal to the Cedar Fair board, the board's response would go on to define the next 15 years at Cedar Point. Why not bigger? Kinzel returned to Aero and Ron Toomer with new marching orders. The ride had to not only be the fastest in the world, but it also had to be over 200 feet tall. This would essentially be the gimmick, the hook that they would base all the marketing on. They chose the name Magnum because Kinzel felt like the word Magnum was an important part of pop culture at the time. The Magnum P.I. was a very popular detective TV show at the time, and Dirty Harry, a series of movies about a detective starring Clint Eastwood. Dirty Harry's second movie had come out about 10 years before, maybe a little more than 10 years before. It was called Magnum Force, and it was also huge at the time. So Dick Kinzel liked the sound of Magnum, liked the cultural zeitgeist dipping into it, and so he chose the name Magnum for this ride. XL was added to symbolize extra long, and 200 was added because now that they had put all their eggs in the "this coaster is over 200 feet" basket, that's the gimmick, that's the marketing hook. It didn't make sense to not have it in the name. They wanted it right there front and center. Magnum XL-200. The term hypercoaster was coined by the park's marketing team to describe any coaster with a height of over 200 feet. Today, this term is still used, but it not only refers to any coaster with a ride structure that goes over 200 feet, but any coaster with over a 200-foot drop. More on that later. The track pieces and support structure columns were shipped from Utah to Sandusky by train, and construction began in winter of 1988. By December, the lift hill and second hill were constructed, along with many of the footers and support structures. The reverse helix at the end was the final section to be built. The ride ended up measuring in at 205 feet tall, despite the park initially advertising it as 201. And it wasn't found until Guinness came out to measure it and make sure it was 201. They were surprised and turned around and said, it's 205. Kinzel was quoted as saying, "We didn't care how much over 200 it was, as long as it was over 200. When it opened, its first 2 hills were the tallest and 4th tallest hills on any roller coaster in the entire world. All in all, the ride cost Cedar Point $8 million in 1989 money, which was a huge gamble for the future of the park that continues to pay off today. After a preview event for the American Coaster Enthusiast Club on May 5th, hi Kitty, the coaster opened to the public on May 6th, 1989. The weather was bad, but the line for this coaster stretched all the way to Corkscrew Station, and the crowds this coaster drew in all year broke the attendance record at Cedar Point. According to Kinzel, coasters are what the public wants and what brings them back. If it takes creating 7 more over the next 15 years, that's certainly what we will do. And as Magnum was their 8th standing coaster, and today Siren's Curse is their 18th, well, it's safe to say old Dick was right. Magnum remained the tallest coaster in the world for 5 years, until it was dethroned by a new Aero hypercoaster in Blackpool, England, called Pepsi Max Big One. It's called the Big One now, because Pepsi Max no longer sponsors it. Pepsi Max Big One came out in 1994. This coaster was designed by, you guessed it, Ron Toomer. Magnum's record for speed and drop height only lasted 1 year, as Steel Phantom at Kennywood opened in 1990, with a second drop that came in at 228 feet. Now this drop was down a hill, so this Steel Phantom was more of a terrain coaster, whereas Magnum was built on mostly flat ground. So it has a longer drop, but at no point did the ride structure actually go over 200 feet. Still considered a hypercoaster because it has that 228-foot drop, which almost puts Magnum's drop to shame. And the speed that you get off Steel Phantom also broke Magnum's record a year after Magnum came out. That said, Steel Phantom nor Pepsi Max Big One have that same feeling that Magnum gives you, that out-of-control feeling, and those triangle hills are conspicuously absent on both. Who else could have been responsible for designing Steel Phantom but good old Ron Toomer? If the fight for the tallest coaster, if we all agreed that we're going to call that the Coaster Wars, then Ron Toomer is Nicolas Cage in that movie about arms dealers. He's selling it to anybody, whoever the highest bidder, I'll get you the next best weapon. Not bad for a guy with motion sickness. But eventually, Arrow would run into trouble. Now, the US was doing quite well in the early 2000s compared to how they were doing in the late 80s. And it became relatively affordable to purchase coasters from European designers and manufacturers, such as B&M in Switzerland and Intamin in Liechtenstein. In spite of adopting computer-aided technology to help them design their coasters, Arrows started to feel old-fashioned and clunky compared to the two newcomers from the Alps. Arrow would file for bankruptcy in 2001 and be purchased by S&S in 2002. Some people say that competition, those coaster wars, ended when Top Thrill Dragster and King Ka were built. And it's true that from the late 2000s on, fewer and fewer of these hyper and giga coasters were being built. While Intamin and B&M aren't shy about building 200, 300-foot plus airtime machines, both companies have definitely pivoted to focus on models that emphasize different ride experiences. So, this cat, she's driving me nuts. Such as LSM launch coasters, accelerators, wing coasters, and dive coasters. Now that said, just 2 short weeks from when I'm recording this, a coaster with a 600-foot terrain drop and a 530-foot freestanding camelback hill is opening in Saudi Arabia. If the coaster wars are truly over, someone forgot to tell Six Flags Qiddiya. I personally don't see myself going to Saudi Arabia for any reason, especially considering I'm well over the height limit for Falcon's flight. It certainly looks to me like the competition for the world's tallest, the coaster wars that started with a dream of a 200-foot coaster in Ohio, are still alive and well today. Thank you so much for watching my video. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking, subscribing to my channel. Every sub really means a lot to me. If you love Magnum, if you hate Magnum, if you've never ridden Magnum, if you never want to ride Magnum again, please let me know in the comments. I promise I'll read every single one of them. This cat is the bane of my existence. Look at her. Look at her. Oh, that cat. Oh, I love her. Come here. She's completely deaf, so it doesn't matter how much I yell at her. She was born that way. Please consider subscribing so I can invade your page every week with more coaster content. Thank you so much for watching. I have been Josef, Vertical Drop Viking out.